Hey everyone, welcome to part two. This sheet of Arch 140 pound cold pressed paper is approximately 9 by 12. It's cut down from a larger sheet and I stretched it and taped it to a board with that gummy tape. I also added some masking tape around the outside to give me a nice clean border. So I lift off the tape, I've got to finish painting. So I started in on this one thinking that I just wanted to have a nice glow at the horizon and keep the sky clear at the top, or more or less white paper at the top. So I wet the horizon and I just dabbed in some cadmium yellow and some cadmium orange to give me a bit of a glow down there. Now for my trees, this is a wet in wet approach. Started out by dropping in some cadmium yellow and then dropping other colors in like a sap green. I think there's a bit of orange in there as well, and just let the paint run around. Doing the same thing here with these orangey puffball trees that I've created. It's cadmium yellow and then a cadmium orange just dropped in and letting them do their thing on the paper. And they are just adding a bit of shadow on the underside with some darker greens. Now for the background trees, I had already inked them in, so I'm kind of limited. It's like a coloring book approach, so I'm more or less just painting in the trees in the background. So that makes them look like they're somewhat closer to the viewer. I like to leave those uninked so I can push them back in the distance. But for the purpose of this painting, they're nice and close to the backyards of the two houses. So for my larger trees, it's the exact same approach as the smaller trees. It's just a wet in wet, dropping in some cadmium yellow mixed with some cadmium orange, and then dropping some sap green in there as well. I'm just letting them fool around on the page and see where they end up. My board's on a bit of a tilt, so I will develop a bit of a bead at the bottom, which is good because that's where I want my shadows to appear on the trees. So this big mass at the top, that's again wet and wet, just throwing colors in to see what I can come up with. Using a fairly big brush for that application too. I think that's a 12 round I've got going. Allows me to drop in a lot of paint. So just filling in the trees in the background. Haven't quite decided on the colors for the houses just yet. My initial sketch was I did it on some off-white paper and I hadn't thought much about colors. So when I sat down to do this, it's pretty well, let's just get going and get started. I did know I was going to paint left to right and do that house on the left. I had an idea for kind of an off-white look and put all the emphasis on the stone fireplace. So here I'm doing the eaves trough in a hooker's green with a Payne's gray. Trunk of the tree is a burnt sienna mixed with a bit of Payne's gray as well. So I'm just filling in all the little details where I know what the colors are going to be. I know what my tree colors are going to be. I've pretty well established that with the very first one I did, so I'm going to have all the trees a similar color with the orange and yellow in them. And then I can work my way around that house on the left, and I'm using the trees in the background more or less to decide what color the house will be. Big healthy bead forming there. And I think I'll just leave that to give it a nice shadow look on the underside. Even though my paper is stretched, it was buckling a bit, but not so much that it could, mess with my image. That's a quinacridone gold. Again, wet and wet, filling the area with the gold and then throwing in some burnt sienna. So with my background established, I thought I could have a nice light colored house on the left and not put a whole lot of paint in there. Just keep it rather simple. So what I did was I put a wet mix of burnt sienna at the base of the house to dirty it up a bit where it meets the ground. And for my nice accents and details, like the shutters here, that's just the burnt sienna with a bit of yellow in it. Doing the same thing for the front door. It's a burnt sienna, and I threw some red in as well, just to make it a little more inviting. And the shrubs around the outside, same as the trees, wet and wet. Start off with some yellow, throw in some green, and add some shadows on the underside. So as everything dry, I'm doing the detail rocks, those nice little ornamental stones above the door and above the window. Light mix, and here now I can get down to business with the chimney, which is the focal point of the house. So this is just a wet mix of burnt umber, and with it nice and wet, I'm dropping in a bunch of other colors like burnt sienna and Payne's gray and a bit of purple as well. I'm just letting that mix on the page. And then I'm lifting out some color to highlight some of the rocks that are sticking, or stones that are sticking out a little further. So just lifting some of the color out. So here's my shadow mix. That's an ultramarine with some purple in it. It's actually carbazole violet is the color. And I'm assuming here that my light is like a midday type thing. It's obviously, I don't know if it's obvious to you, but it's kind of a fall scene. So I've got my light coming straight down, so all my shadows will be cast straight down. And again, it's ultramarine with a bit of purple in there. So with my left house looking pretty good, I'm going to do the same approach with this, this stone fireplace over on the right. Same color combinations, wet and wet. Letting them fool around on the page. And just lifting out a few highlights with a damp brush. Now I didn't want this house to be identical to the one on the left. So I'm going to keep the left-hand side of the house white, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with the right-hand side of that house. So in the meantime, I'm doing a dry brush approach to the foreground. I'm being careful. I wanted to keep some of those white highlights. So I just did some dry brush for the undercolor, and I will be going back into the foreground and adding some more to autumn it up a bit. So my trees weren't very defined, so I'm just adding some shadow on the underside. And that's just a dark green. Going in wet and then softening the edges so that the edges aren't too hard under the foliage. Now you can barely see him, but I got a little guy in there with a wheelbarrow. I just added a bit of yellow to his wheelbarrow. We'll get around to him later. And here I'm defining the house on the right with the shadows. Again, the light's coming more or less straight down. If anything, it might be up to the left a bit and just casting a bit of shadow to the right. For the roof, same thing, wet and wet. That's quinacridone gold. And I'll toss in some burnt sienna just to dirty it up a bit. Create some interest, give it some texture. And then we'll get it onto the window. So I'm pretending the sky is blue up there, so all my reflections are going to be blue. Oh, hey, by the way, if you're interested in a print of this painting, you can find me over on Etsy. That's my sales pitch for today. Now, a nice bright red door, inviting. Just threw a little bit of yellow in there as well, just to tone it down a bit. And as I was looking at it, I said it was very plain, so I've decided to make this the right-hand side, or the main part of the house, a stone finish or a cement look. So I've gone in wet, lots of blues and browns, and just letting the colors do their thing on the paper. So with it wet, I keep dropping in colors until I get the look I want. Now once I'd put the stonework down, my shadows kind of got lost, so I beefed up the shadows a bit with some more Payne's Gray. And for the addition, the left-hand portion of the house, I just did some dry brushing to add a bit more texture to the front. Just dragging the brush on its side and adding a bit of color. This tree is a little bit larger, so I can do wet in that as well. Burnt sienna, dropping in some Payne's Gray. And here I'm just about done, so I figured I would dress up the foreground a bit. Again, autumn it up or fall it up a bit, and added a bit of cadmium yellow and a little more green, kind of a glaze over the original texture that I had laid down there. And lastly, my homeowner out there doing his yard work. Red hat, green shirt, and if you're following along, he's got mustard pants on. And that should about do it. And we'll just get these last little bits down, get it signed, get the tape off it, and there it is. So thanks for dropping by, and we'll see you again soon.